Sometimes the smallest person in the room carries the biggest secret. Maya Chun had been called weak, fragile, and useless her entire life. Standing barely 5 feet tall with delicate features that made people assume she was helpless, she had learned to live in the shadows. But shadows, as it turns out, are the perfect place to hide extraordinary abilities. When General Marcus Kane, a decorated war hero known for his brutal training methods and iron fist, decided to make an example out of the quiet girl who dared to apply for elite military training, he thought he was dealing with just another wannabe soldier who would crack under pressure. He had no idea that Maya had survived things that would break most people's minds, or that her small frame housed reflexes faster than lightning and a pain tolerance that defied human limits. What happened in those 3 seconds after he broke her ribs would not only change both their lives forever, but would also expose a government conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Some people are underestimated because they appear weak. Others are underestimated because they're exactly as dangerous as they look, and that's the most dangerous kind of person there is. This is the story of how a useless wimp brought a decorated general to his knees and uncovered secrets that powerful people would kill to keep buried. Maya Chin had always been invisible, and that's exactly how she preferred it. At 22, she moved through the world like a ghost, her small frame and quiet demeanor making her easy to overlook. People saw what they expected to see, a fragile young woman who looked like she might break in a strong wind. They never bothered to look deeper, to notice the way her dark eyes tracked every movement around her, or how she seemed to know exactly where every exit was in any room she entered. The military recruitment office in downtown Chicago was buzzing with activity on that cold Tuesday morning in March. Young men and women filled out paperwork, their faces bright with dreams of service and adventure. Maya sat in the corner, her application clutched in hands that appeared delicate but were actually callous from years of secret training. She had been preparing for this moment for over a decade, but nobody around her would have guessed it. Next, called the recruitment officer, a middle-aged man with graying temples and kind eyes. Maya approached the desk, her footsteps barely making a sound on the linoleum floor. "Maya Chun," she said quietly, placing her completed application on the desk. The officer, Sergeant Rodriguez according to his nameplate, glanced at her paperwork and then looked up at her with barely concealed surprise. "Elite Special Forces Training Program?" he asked, his eyebrows raised. "Miss, are you sure you meant to check that box? This program has a 98% failure rate. Most applicants are former athletes, martial artists, or already have military experience." Maya met his gaze steadily. "I'm sure." Sergeant Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. She was maybe 5 feet tall and couldn't weigh more than 100 pounds. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain gray sweater that seemed to swallow her small frame. Nothing about her suggested she could survive even basic military training, let alone the most demanding program the military offered. "Miss Chun, I have to ask, do you have any combat experience? Martial arts training? Athletics background?" "Some," Maya replied, which was technically true. She had been training in various forms of combat since she was 7 years old, but that training had taken place in very unofficial circumstances that she couldn't mention on any government form. The sergeant sighed and stamped her application. "Well, it's not my job to talk you out of it. Report to Fort Braxton next Monday at 0600 hours. Bring only what's on this list." He handed her a sheet of paper with basic supplies listed. "And Miss Chun, this program breaks people, strong people. I'd suggest you really think about whether this is what you want." Maya nodded politely and left the office, her expression unchanged. As she walked down the street toward the bus stop, she allowed herself a small smile. If only Sergeant Rodriguez knew that she had been breaking herself and rebuilding stronger for most of her life, he might understand why she wasn't worried about what Fort Braxton could throw at her. The truth was, Maya had been preparing for this opportunity since she was a child. Her father, Dr. James Chun, had been a military scientist working on classified projects before his death when Maya was 12. What most people didn't know was that Dr. Chun had been developing enhancement techniques for soldiers. Not the kind involving chemicals or surgery, but training methods that could push the human body and mind far beyond normal limits. After her father's mysterious death in what was officially ruled a car accident, Maya had found his hidden research. She had spent the next 10 years following his training protocols, pushing herself through exercises that were designed to create the perfect soldier. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had to hide her abilities to even get the chance to use them officially. Maya's childhood hadn't been normal by any definition. After her father died and her mother disappeared shortly after, Maya had been placed with her grandmother, a woman who understood the importance of keeping secrets. Grandmother Chun had encouraged Maya's unusual training, understanding that the knowledge her son had died for needed to be preserved somehow. In the basement of her grandmother's house, Maya had built a training facility that would have impressed professional athletes. She had practiced combat techniques that combined elements from multiple martial arts, trained her body to function on minimal sleep and food, and developed mental discipline techniques that allowed her to block out pain and fear. Every day, for 10 years, she had pushed herself harder, knowing that someday she would need to be strong enough to survive whatever had killed her father. The bus ride home gave Maya time to think about what lay ahead. Fort Braxton was where General Marcus Kane ran his elite training program. Kane was a legend in military circles, a decorated veteran who had served in multiple conflicts and had developed training methods that produced some of the most effective soldiers in the world. He was also known for being ruthless with recruits who couldn't meet his impossible standards. Maya had researched Kane extensively. She knew that he had a reputation for being particularly harsh with female recruits, believing that women didn't belong in combat roles. He had been known to make examples of women who dared to enter his program, pushing them until they broke and then using their failures to justify his prejudices. Maya was counting on his arrogance and prejudice to work in her favor. When Maya arrived at her grandmother's house that evening, she found the elderly woman sitting in her favorite chair, reading. Grandmother Chin looked up as Maya entered, her sharp eyes taking in her granddaughter's expression. "It's done?" she asked in Mandarin, the usual language for private conversations. "I'll leave Monday," Maya replied in the same language. "Are you sure about this, grandmother? Once I'm in the system, there's no hiding anymore." The older woman set down her book and studied Maya's face. "Your father died because he discovered something dangerous. The people responsible think his research died with him. It's time they learned otherwise." Maya nodded, understanding the weight of what her grandmother was saying. This wasn't just about proving herself or fulfilling a dream of military service. This was about justice for her father and potentially exposing whatever conspiracy had led to his death. That weekend, Maya made her final preparations. She packed the basic supplies on a list, but also included some items that weren't standard issue. A small notebook that contained coded versions of her father's most important research, and a locket that had belonged to her mother. She spent hours in the basement, running through combat scenarios one final time, pushing her body through exercises that would have hospitalized most people. On Sunday night, as Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling, She thought about all the ways the next few weeks could go wrong. The military would run background checks, and while her official record was clean, there were always risks when dealing with government databases. Kay might be even more brutal than she expected. The other recruits might figure out that she was hiding something. But Maya had learned long ago that fear was just another obstacle to overcome. Her father had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Tomorrow, she would begin the most dangerous phase of a plan that had been years in the making. Maya closed her eyes and ran through the meditation techniques her father had taught her. In her mind, she could still hear his voice explaining that true strength came not from muscle or size, but from the ability to endure, adapt, and strike when the moment was right. She had spent 10 years becoming a weapon that nobody would see coming, hidden inside the body of a girl that everyone would underestimate. As sleep finally took her, Maya's last conscious thought was a promise to her father's memory. She would find out who killed him and why. She would use the very system that had betrayed him to expose the truth. And if anyone tried to break her along the way, they would discover that she had been broken and rebuilt so many times that she had become unbreakable. The alarm clock beside her bed read 11:47 p.m. when Maya finally drifted off to sleep, her mind already focused on the challenges that would begin in less than 6 hours. She had no way of knowing that General Marcus Kane was also lying awake that night, reviewing the files of his new recruits and planning exactly how he would break each one of them. When he had seen Maya's application photo, he had actually laughed out loud, already imagining how quickly the small Asian girl would wash out of his program. Neither of them could have predicted that in less than a week, everything they thought they knew about strength, weakness, and the nature of true power would be turned completely upside down. Fort Braxton sprawled across several thousand acres of North Carolina countryside, its facilities hidden behind high fences and security checkpoints that made it clear this wasn't a place for tourists. Maya arrived at 0545 hours on Monday morning, 15 minutes early as her father had always taught her. The gate guards barely glanced at her paperwork before waving her through to the reception building. The other recruits were easy to spot. They stood in clusters around the parking area, sizing each other up with the careful attention of predators meeting for the first time. Maya counted 23 others, mostly men, all of them looking like they had stepped out of a military recruitment poster. Broad shoulders, confident postures, the kind of physical presence that commanded attention. Maya parked her beat-up Honda Civic between a lifted truck and a motorcycle, feeling like a sparrow landing among hawks. She grabbed her single duffel bag and walked toward the group, noting how conversations stopped as people noticed her. She could practically hear their thoughts. What was this tiny girl doing here? All right, listen up. The voice that cut through the morning air belonged to a drill sergeant who looked like he had been carved from granite. I'm Sergeant First Class Martinez, and for the next few minutes, I'm the closest thing you have to a friend in this world. Behind me is the building where you'll check in and get your room assignments. In exactly 30 minutes, you'll meet the man who will decide whether you're worth the oxygen you're breathing. Maya listened carefully as Martinez explained the basic rules. No personal phones, no contact with the outside world except for approved weekly calls, no quitting except for medical emergencies. The dropout rate was 98%, and most people washed out in the first week. Those who showed promise but couldn't cut it would be recycled to standard military training. Those who showed no promise at all would be sent home with recommendations that they consider civilian careers. As the group moved toward the check-in building, Maya found herself walking beside a young man who looked like he could bench press a car. His nameplate read Jackson, and he glanced down at her with curious eyes. First time in a military program? He asked, his tone friendly but clearly condescending. Yes, Maya replied simply. Might want to consider asking for a transfer to something more suitable, Jackson continued. This program is designed for people who can handle extreme physical and mental stress. No shame in knowing your limitations. Maya nodded politely but didn't respond. She had learned years ago that arguing with people's assumptions was usually counterproductive. Better to let them underestimate her until the moment she needed them to understand otherwise. The check-in process was efficient and impersonal. Maya received her room assignment, a small single room that was basically a concrete box with a cot, desk, and metal locker. Her roommate was apparently someone named Sarah Mitchell, a former college basketball player who looked like she could probably deadlift Maya without much effort. So you're the other girl, Sarah said as Maya unpacked her few belongings. Gotta say, I'm surprised there are even two of us. Kane has a reputation for being pretty hostile to women in his program. What kind of reputation? Maya asked, though she had already researched this extensively. The kind where he seems to take pleasure in proving that women can't hack it in elite military roles, Sarah replied, her voice grim. Last year, 3 women started the program. One broke her leg in week 2, one had a nervous breakdown in week 3, and the third one quit after Kane made her carry a 200-pound pack for 12 hours straight. Maya processed this information while organizing her gear. Kane's methods weren't just challenging. They were specifically designed to target what he saw as female weaknesses: physical strength, emotional resilience, the ability to handle psychological pressure. He would probably focus on her size first, assuming that her small frame meant she couldn't handle the physical demands. At 0630 hours sharp, all 24 recruits assembled in the main training facility. The building was enormous, filled with obstacle courses, weight equipment, and training areas that looked like they had been designed by someone with a deep understanding of how to push human bodies to their breaking point. General Marcus Kane entered the room like a force of nature. He was exactly what Maya had expected from her research: tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and ice-blue eyes that seemed to catalog every weakness in the room within seconds. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and his presence filled the space in a way that made everyone stand a little straighter. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen." Kane's voice carried easily through the large room. "I am General Kane, and for the next 12 weeks, I own your sorry lives. Most of you will not be here in a week. Most of the rest will not be here in a month. The few who remain will discover what it truly means to be warriors." Maya watched Kane's eyes sweep the group, noting how his gaze lingered on her and Sarah with obvious distaste. When his eyes met hers, she saw something that made her stomach tighten, not just skepticism, but active hostility. This wasn't going to be about proving herself worthy. This was going to be about survival. This program was designed to create the most elite soldiers in the world, Kane continued. We do not lower standards for anyone, for any reason. We do not make accommodations for physical limitations, emotional sensitivities, or political correctness. You will meet the standards or you'll fail. It's that simple. The general began walking among the recruits as he spoke, his presence somehow making the large room feel smaller. When he stopped in front of Maya, she could smell his aftershave and see the small scar along his jawline that her research had told her came from shrapnel in Afghanistan. "Some of you," Kane said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper while his eyes stayed locked on Maya's face, "seem to be under the impression that determination can overcome the laws of physics, that heart can compensate for inadequate muscle mass, that willpower can replace the basic physical requirements of elite combat operations." Maya kept her expression neutral, though she could feel every other recruit's eyes on her. Kane was making an example of her before the program had even officially begun, establishing the narrative that would define how everyone else saw her. In the real world, Kane continued, still staring at Maya. Enemies don't care about your feelings. Bullets don't slow down because you believe in yourself. When you're carrying a wounded teammate while under fire, physics doesn't care about your inspiring personal journey. The general stepped back and addressed the group again. Your first exercise is simple. A 12-mile run in full gear, followed by an obstacle course, followed by a combat simulation. Standard time limit is 4 hours. Anyone who can't complete it in that time can collect their things and head home. Anyone who gives up along the way isn't worthy of wearing the uniform. As the recruits were given their gear, 40-pound packs, combat boots, tactical vests, Maya noticed Kane watching her struggle to adjust the straps. The equipment had clearly been sized for larger people, and the pack was almost comically oversized on her small frame. Problem, recruit? Kane asked, approaching her again. No, sir, Maya replied, though the pack was so large it was throwing off her center of gravity. Good, because in the field, the enemy won't provide gear in your size. Kane's smile was cold. They'll expect you to carry the same load as everyone else, cover the same distance, fight with the same intensity. If you can't do that, you're not just useless to your unit. You're a liability that gets people killed. The run began at exactly 700 hours. Maya had run thousands of miles in her training, but never with a 40-pound pack that was poorly fitted to her frame. Within the first mile, she could feel the straps cutting into her shoulders and the weight throwing off her natural rhythm. Several of the male recruits quickly pulled ahead, their longer legs and greater muscle mass giving them obvious advantages. But Maya had trained for this. Her father's protocols had included exercises specifically designed to teach her body how to function efficiently under adverse conditions. She adjusted her breathing, found a rhythm that worked with the awkward weight distribution, and settled into a pace that she knew she could maintain for 12 miles. By mile 3, 2 recruits had already dropped out. Jackson, the friendly giant who had warned her about the program, was setting a brutal pace at the front of the group. Sarah was keeping up with the main pack, her basketball conditioning serving her well. Maya found herself running alone, too slow for the front group, but too fast for the stragglers who were already showing signs of distress. Kane rode alongside the runners in a military vehicle, calling out encouragement that sounded more like threats. When he pulled up beside Maya around mile 5, she could see him shaking his head in disgust. Still here, Chen? He called through the open window. Most people would have had the sense to quit by now. Maya didn't waste breath responding. She had learned to save every bit of energy for the task at hand. But she could feel Kane's eyes on her, waiting for the moment when her small frame would finally betray her, when the physics he had lectured about would prove him right. Around mile 8, Maya began to understand why this program had such a high failure rate. The course wasn't just difficult, it was designed to be demoralizing. Hills appeared just when your legs were burning. Water stations were spaced to maximize dehydration. The terrain seemed calculated to cause maximum stress on joints and muscles. But Maya had spent years preparing her body for exactly this kind of punishment. Her father's training had taught her to find efficiency in movement, to use momentum and timing instead of relying purely on strength. She began to slowly gain ground on some of the larger recruits whose superior physical gifts were being offset by poor pacing and inefficient technique. By mile 10, the field had spread out considerably. Jackson was still in the lead, but his pace had slowed. Sarah was struggling, but maintaining her position in the main group. 3 more recruits had dropped out, picked up by the follow vehicle, and driven back to base in defeat. Maya was no longer running alone. Two of the male recruits had fallen back to her pace, their faces red with exertion and their breathing labored. She passed them both in mile 11 without changing her own breathing pattern, her small legs moving in the efficient rhythm her father had taught her years ago. When the 12-mile mark finally appeared ahead, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced since her father's death: genuine confidence in her abilities. She had not only completed the run, she had finished in the top half of the group, ahead of 8 recruits who had started with significant physical advantages. Kane was waiting at the finish line, his expression unreadable as Maya crossed the marker and immediately began preparing for the obstacle course. She had expected some acknowledgement of her performance, maybe even grudging respect. Instead, Kane's voice carried clearly across the assembly area. Congratulations to those who completed the run. Now we'll see who is actually running and who is just taking a leisurely jog. His eyes found Maya in the group. The obstacle course will separate the pretenders from the real soldiers. Some of you might have gotten lucky on the run, but obstacles don't lie about your capabilities. Maya wiped sweat from her face and checked the fit of her gear. The hardest part was still ahead, and Kane was clearly not finished trying to break her. But for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually survive the first day. And if she could survive one day, she could survive however many days it took to find the truth about her father's death. The obstacle course at Fort Braxton looked like something designed by someone who understood exactly how to push human beings past their breaking point. 30-foot rope climbs, walls that required teamwork to overcome, crawls through mud under barbed wire, and a series of balance beams suspended over water that would test both agility and nerve. Maya studied the course while the recruits caught their breath from the 12-mile run. She could see immediately which obstacles would be problematic for someone her size. The rope climb would favor upper body strength she didn't possess. The wall climb required reach that her short arms couldn't provide. The balance beams would actually favor her smaller frame and lower center of gravity, but by the time she reached them, she might already be eliminated. Kane stood on a platform overlooking the course, his voice carrying easily across the training area. This course has been completed by less than 40% of recruits who attempt it on their first try. The record time is 18 minutes and 37 seconds, set by a Navy SEAL who went on to become one of our most decorated graduates. Maya noted the emphasis on first try and realized this was another psychological tactic. Kane was setting expectations that would make most people feel like failures even if they completed the course within the allowed time limit. You'll run the course individually, Kane continued. Each of you will be timed and scored not just on completion, but on technique, efficiency, and the degree to which you help or hinder other recruits. Leadership isn't just about being first. It's about ensuring your team succeeds. The first recruit to attempt the course was Jackson, the massive man who had dominated the run. Maya watched carefully as he attacked each obstacle, noting his techniques and the ways his size both helped and hindered his progress. He powered through the rope climb with pure upper body strength, but struggled with the balance beams where his bulk made precise movements difficult. Sarah went fourth, and Maya could see the former basketball player's athletic background serving her well. She had good body awareness and problem-solving skills, adapting her approach when brute force wasn't sufficient. Her time was respectable, though not spectacular. Maya was called to run the course 15th, which meant she had been able to observe the techniques that worked and those that didn't. She had also been able to see which obstacles Kane paid the most attention to, and where he seemed to be looking for specific demonstrations of capability. As Maya approached the first obstacle, a series of hurdles that required both speed and coordination. She could hear Kane speaking to one of his assistants. His voice was clearly meant to carry. This should be interesting. Physics doesn't negotiate, no matter how determined someone is to defy it. Maya ignored the commentary and focused on her father's teachings about efficiency of movement. The hurdles weren't about jumping as high as possible. They were about maintaining forward momentum while clearing the obstacles. She flowed over them in a rhythm that looked almost effortless, her small frame requiring less vertical lift than the larger recruits. The rope climb was where Maya expected to face her first real challenge. The rope was thick and rough, designed to test grip strength and upper body power that she simply didn't possess in the same measure as the men who had gone before her. She watched Jackson's technique again in her mind, pure power, hauling himself up hand over hand with minimal leg involvement. Maya took a different approach. Instead of fighting the rope with strength she didn't have, she used her father's teachings about leverage and efficiency. She wrapped the rope around her leg in a technique that allowed her to use her entire body weight for each upward movement, essentially walking up the rope instead of pulling herself up it. The technique was slower than Jackson's brute force approach, but it was sustainable. While other recruits had burned out their grip strength halfway up and fallen back to the bottom, Maya maintained steady progress all the way to the top. Her time for this obstacle was actually better than average, and she could see Kane making notes on his clipboard with an expression that might have been surprise. The wall climb was next, and this was where Maya's height disadvantage became most apparent. The wall was 12 feet high, with minimal handholds, designed to require either exceptional upper body strength or teamwork to overcome. Maya had watched the previous recruits either muscle their way over through sheer power or receive boosts from teammates who had already completed their runs. Maya was running solo, with no teammates available to provide assistance. She circled the wall once, looking for any feature she could use to her advantage. What she found was a slight depression in the concrete at the base, probably created by erosion, that provided just enough of a foothold to add a crucial few inches to her reach. Using momentum and timing instead of strength, Maya ran at the wall and used the small depression to launch herself high enough to catch the top edge with her fingertips. Her small hands actually gave her an advantage here. She could grip the narrow ledge more securely than recruits with larger hands. She pulled herself up and over in one smooth motion that looked effortless but required perfect timing and technique. Kane was no longer trying to hide his attention. Maya could feel his eyes tracking her every movement, waiting for the obstacle that would finally prove his point about her limitations. The crawl under barbed wire was designed to test mental toughness as much as physical capability. The space was barely 18 inches high, forcing recruits to army crawl through thick mud while barbed wire scraped at their backs and gear. Larger recruits struggled with the confined space, often getting their packs caught on the wire or losing momentum in the deep mud. Maya's small frame was actually an advantage here. She could move through the space without her pack dragging on the wire, and her light weight meant she didn't sink as deeply into the mud as heavier recruits. She emerged from the other end cleaner and faster than anyone who had gone before her. The balance beams were where Maya expected to excel. The obstacles consisted of a series of narrow beams suspended 8 feet over a water hazard, requiring recruits to navigate across while maintaining their balance despite fatigue and the awkward weight distribution of their gear. Maya's years of training in her grandmother's basement had included extensive work on balance and proprioception. Her father's research had emphasized that superior soldiers needed to be able to function effectively even when their inner ear and balance systems were compromised by stress, fatigue, or injury. She crossed the beams with a fluidity that made it look easy, never hesitating or wobbling despite the 40-pound pack that was still throwing off her center of gravity. Her time for this section was the fastest recorded that day, and she could hear murmurs of surprise from the recruits who had already finished their runs. The final obstacle was a combat simulation that required recruits to low-crawl 50 yards while simulated gunfire played overhead. Then, engage multiple targets with a training rifle while their hands were still shaking from exertion. This was designed to test the ability to perform precise actions under stress and fatigue. Maya had never fired the specific rifle model they were using, but her father had taught her shooting principles that applied to any weapon system. Breathing control, trigger discipline, sight alignment. The fundamentals were the same regardless of the specific hardware. As she settled into the shooting position, Maya felt something shift inside her mind. This wasn't just about completing the obstacle course anymore. This was about demonstrating capabilities that had been hidden for years, about proving that her father's training methods could create a soldier who could excel despite not fitting the traditional mold. She fired the required number of rounds with mechanical precision, each shot hitting center mass on the targets despite the fact that her hands should have been shaking from the exertion of the previous obstacles. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence from the observation area where Kane and his staff were watching. Maya's final time for the obstacle course was not just acceptable. It was the third best time recorded that day, behind only Jackson and another recruit who had been a college gymnast. More importantly, her technique scores were the highest anyone had seen, reflecting efficiency and problem-solving skills that compensated for her physical limitations. As Maya collected her gear and prepared for the final portion of the day's testing, she could see Kane approaching with an expression she couldn't quite read. This was the moment she had been both anticipating and dreading. She had proven that she could compete with the larger, stronger recruits, but she knew that Kane's prejudices wouldn't be overcome by a single good performance. Interesting technique on the rope climb, Chun, Kane said, his voice neutral but his eyes still hostile. Very efficient. Almost like you'd done it before. Thank you, sir, Maya replied, keeping her voice steady despite the implied suspicion in Kane's comment. The combat simulation portion is next, Kane continued. This is where we separate the people who can perform under real pressure from those who just got lucky on a glorified playground. I hope you're not planning to coast on your obstacle course performance. Maya nodded acknowledgement, but didn't respond verbally. She was beginning to understand that Kane wasn't just testing her physical capabilities, he was probing for psychological weaknesses, looking for buttons he could push to make her crack under pressure. The combat simulation facility was a warehouse-sized building filled with mock urban environments, complete with buildings, vehicles, and hidden passages. The scenario would place each recruit in a hostile environment where they would need to navigate, make tactical decisions, and engage multiple threats while operating alone. As Maya prepared her gear for the simulation, she reflected on how the day had gone so far. She had exceeded expectations on every test, but instead of earning respect, she seemed to be drawing increased scrutiny from Kane. Her success was being treated as an anomaly that needed explanation rather than achievement that deserved recognition. Maya checked her weapon one final time and stepped toward the entrance to the simulation facility. She had no way of knowing that Kane had made a decision during her obstacle course run. He had concluded that Maya-chan was hiding something significant about her background and capabilities, and he intended to push her until she either broke or revealed what she was really hiding. Neither of them realized that in less than 24 hours, the careful balance of power between them would shift dramatically, and Maya's true capabilities would be revealed in a way that neither of them could have anticipated. The combat simulation facility at Fort Braxton was a marvel of military engineering, designed to replicate every possible urban warfare scenario a soldier might encounter. Maya stepped through the entrance into what looked like a small city, complete with multi-story buildings, alleyways, vehicles, and hidden sniper positions. The air smelled of concrete dust and gun oil, and she could hear the distant sounds of recorded civilian chatter meant to add realism to the exercise. Kane's voice crackled through speakers hidden throughout the facility. Scenario briefing. Chun. You are a forward reconnaissance element operating alone in hostile territory. Your mission is to gather intelligence on enemy positions, eliminate high-value targets when possible, and extract without detection. You have 30 minutes to complete the scenario. Enemy forces are played by instructors with simulated ammunition. Getting shot means mission failure and immediate elimination from the program. Maya checked her equipment one final time. Training rifle with blank rounds, tactical vest with sensors that would register hits, communication gear, and basic reconnaissance tools. Everything felt familiar despite the fact that she had never used this specific equipment configuration before. Her father's training had emphasized adaptability, the ability to function effectively with whatever tools were available. Simulation begins in 3, 2, 1. Kane's voice counted down, followed by the sound of a buzzer that echoed through the facility. Maya immediately moved toward the shadow of the nearest building, her movement pattern automatically shifting to the stealth technique her father had taught her. She had spent years learning to move silently, to use cover and concealment effectively, to read terrain for tactical advantages that others might miss. The first enemy position revealed itself within 2 minutes. Maya spotted the muzzle flash of an instructor's weapon from a second-story window before she heard the crack of the blank round. Instead of returning fire immediately, she used the intelligence to begin mapping the defensive positions in her mind. Maya's approach to the scenario was different from what Kane was expecting. Instead of the aggressive, direct tactics that most recruits employed, she began a methodical reconnaissance that treated the exercise more like a real-world intelligence gathering mission than a combat simulation. She moved through the facility like a ghost, using techniques that went far beyond what any civilian should have known. Maya had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated human presence, disturbed dust patterns, sight lines that offered tactical advantages, the way shadows fell differently when someone was hiding behind cover. Within 10 minutes, Maya had mapped the positions of all 6 instructor opponents without being detected once. She had also identified 3 high-value targets, marked with special identifiers, and had planned approach routes that would allow her to eliminate each one without alerting the others to her presence. Kane watched Maya's progress through the facility's security cameras with growing confusion. The small woman was moving with a level of tactical sophistication that shouldn't have been possible for a civilian recruit. Her route selection was perfect, her use of cover was textbook, and her situational awareness was better than some experienced soldiers he had trained. Maya's first target elimination came 12 minutes into the scenario. She had worked her way to within 10 feet of an instructor position behind a mock vehicle, waiting for the perfect moment when his attention was focused elsewhere. When she fired, the blank round registered a perfect center mass hit on the instructor's sensors, and he was required by the rules to play dead. The elimination was executed so quietly that none of the other instructors realized their teammate had been taken out. Maya continued her methodical approach, treating each target as a separate problem to be solved rather than rushing toward a quick completion. Her second elimination required more creativity. The instructor was positioned on a rooftop with excellent sight lines over the entire facility. Maya couldn't approach directly without being spotted, so she used a technique her father had taught her for dealing with elevated threats. Instead of trying to reach the rooftop, Maya positioned herself in a building across the street and waited. She had observed the instructor's scanning pattern and identified a brief window when his attention would be focused on a different sector. When a moment came, she leaned out just far enough to acquire her target and fired a single shot that again registered a perfect hit. Kim was no longer just watching Maya's progress. He was studying it. Her tactical decision-making was sophisticated enough to suggest formal training, but her file indicated no military background. Her movement patterns were too polished for someone who had learned from books or videos. Someone had taught her these skills through extensive hands-on practice. The third target elimination was Maya's most impressive yet. The instructor was positioned in a narrow alley with limited approach routes, and he was specifically watching for anyone attempting to reach his position. Maya solved the problem by using the facility's drainage system to approach from below, emerging through a maintenance access point that placed her directly behind her target. With 18 minutes elapsed in the 30-minute scenario, Maya had successfully eliminated 3 high-value targets without being detected or taking any return fire. She still needed to extract from the facility, which would require her to navigate past the remaining 3 instructors who were now actively searching for the threat that had eliminated their teammates. Maya's extraction route took her through the most complex part of the facility, a multi-building section designed to simulate dense urban terrain with multiple levels and hidden passages. She moved through the area like someone who had spent years learning to disappear in complex environments, using techniques that went beyond standard military training. Kay made a decision that would change everything. Instead of allowing Maya to complete the scenario according to the standard rules, he activated his override privileges and entered the facility himself. He told his staff it was to observe the recruit's performance more closely, but the truth was that he needed to understand what Maya-chan was really hiding. Maya was in the final phase of her extraction when she became aware that the dynamic in the facility had changed. Her father's training had taught her to recognize when she was being actively hunted versus passively observed, and something in the patterns of movement around her suggested that someone new had entered the game. Kane moved through the facility with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the terrain. He wasn't trying to remain hidden. He was using his knowledge advantage to position himself where Maya would have to pass during her extraction. He wanted to see her tactical decision-making when faced with an unexpected threat. Maya detected Kane's presence before she saw him. Years of training had developed her situational awareness to a level where she could sense when someone with hostile intent was nearby. She found a concealed position and observed Kane's movement pattern, quickly realizing that he was trying to intercept her. This created a problem Maya hadn't anticipated. The scenario rules didn't account for the commanding officer entering the simulation as an active participant. She wasn't sure if Kane was playing by the same rules as the instructors, or if this was some kind of test that required different responses. Maya made a decision that reflected both her tactical training and her growing understanding of Kane's personality. Instead of avoiding him, she would demonstrate capabilities that might finally earn his respect. She began to track Kane through the facility, reversing the hunter-prey relationship he had tried to establish. Kane realized he was being followed when Maya had been tracking him for nearly 3 minutes. The recognition came not from any sound or visual cue, but from the veteran soldier's instinct that told him when he had become someone else's target. He stopped moving and tried to identify where Maya was positioned, but she had already anticipated this response. Maya had learned patience from her father's training. She waited until Kane had convinced himself that he was imagining the sensation of being watched, and then she continued her pursuit. She was gathering intelligence on Kane's own tactical capabilities, looking for weaknesses or patterns she could exploit if the situation escalated beyond the simulation. When Kane finally turned ahead toward what he thought was Maya's most likely extraction route, he found her waiting for him. She was positioned behind cover with her training rifle aimed at center mass, close enough that a miss would have been impossible. Her presence in that position meant she had outmaneuvered him completely, anticipating his movements and positioning herself exactly where he hadn't expected her to be. "Scenario complete, sir," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the silence of the facility. "Mission accomplished, enemy commander eliminated, extraction route secured." Kane stared at Maya for a long moment, his mind processing what had just happened. She hadn't just completed the scenario. She had dominated it in a way that demonstrated tactical abilities far beyond what any civilian recruit should possess. More importantly, she had outmaneuvered him personally, something that had never happened in the history of his training program. "Lower your weapon, Chun," Kane said, his voice carefully controlled. "Simulation is over." Maya complied immediately, but Kane could see that her stance remained alert and ready. She wasn't relaxed just because he had called an end to the exercise. Her body language suggested she was prepared for whatever might happen next. As they walked toward the facility exit, Kane's mind was racing through possibilities. Maya Chun was not what she appeared to be. Her tactical capabilities suggested formal training by someone with high-level military or intelligence experience. Her physical conditioning was beyond what any normal fitness program could produce. Her psychological profile showed stress tolerance that typically came only from exposure to real danger. "Interesting performance, Chun," Kane said as they reached the exit. "Almost like you'd run scenarios like this before." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, maintaining the neutral tone she had used throughout the day. Kane studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or nervousness. What he saw instead was the calm confidence of someone who had just completed a routine exercise. Maya wasn't nervous about being questioned because she had expected it. "We'll debrief your performance tomorrow," Kane continued. "I want to review the security footage and discuss some of your tactical decisions." Maya nodded acknowledgement, but Kane could see something in her eyes that he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't fear or concern about the debriefing. It was something that looked almost like anticipation, as if she was looking forward to the conversation. As Maya left the facility and headed back toward the barracks, Kane remained behind to review the security footage immediately. What he saw confirmed his suspicions and raised new questions that would keep him awake most of the night. Maya Chun had demonstrated capabilities that shouldn't exist in someone with her background, and Kane was determined to find out what she was hiding. Neither of them knew that tomorrow's debriefing would become something much more significant than a routine performance review. Kane was planning to push Maya until she revealed the truth about her background, while Maya was preparing to take the first steps toward exposing the conspiracy that had killed her father. The collision between their two agendas would create consequences that neither of them could predict. The debriefing room at Fort Braxton was deliberately intimidating. Bare concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and a metal table that had probably witnessed countless interrogations disguised as routine meetings. Maya entered at exactly 0800 hours the next morning, her uniform immaculate, and her expression calm, despite knowing that this conversation would determine whether she could continue her mission or whether everything would unravel before she had learned anything useful about her father's death. General Kane was already waiting, along with two men Maya didn't recognize. One wore a standard military uniform with intelligence corps insignia, while the other was in civilian clothes that screamed federal agent. The presence of outside personnel told Maya that her performance yesterday had triggered interest from people with security clearances higher than Kane's. "Sit down, Chun," Kane commanded, gesturing to a chair positioned directly across from the three men. "We need to discuss some inconsistencies in your background and performance." Maya took the offered seat, automatically cataloging the positions of all three men, the locations of the exits, and potential weapons or obstacles in the room. Her father's training had taught her to assess every situation for tactical advantages, even meetings that were supposed to be routine. "I'm Colonel Harris from Military Intelligence." The uniformed stranger introduced himself. "This is Agent Williams from the Department of Defense Investigative Service. We're here because your performance yesterday raised some flags that require clarification." Maya nodded politely but didn't speak. Her father had taught her that in situations like this, the person asking questions had an agenda, and the best strategy was to provide minimal information until she understood what that agenda was. Kane activated a tablet and began displaying video clips from yesterday's simulation. "Let's start with your movement patterns, Chun. This is footage of you navigating the urban environment during the combat scenario." The video showed Maya moving through the facility with fluid precision, using cover and concealment techniques that looked effortless but were actually highly sophisticated. Kane paused the video at several points to highlight specific moments. "Here, you check a corner using a technique called slicing the pie," Kane noted. "It's an advanced tactical movement that's taught to Special Operations Forces." "Where did you learn this?" "I read about it online, sir," Maya replied, which was technically true. Her father's research notes had been stored in digital files that she had accessed through his encrypted computer. Colonel Harris leaned forward. "Miss Chun, we've reviewed hundreds of hours of security footage from various military training facilities. Your movement patterns don't match someone who learned techniques from internet videos. They match someone who's had extensive hands-on training under real-world conditions." Agent Williams opened a file folder and spread several documents on the table. "We've also conducted a thorough background investigation since yesterday. Your official records are remarkably clean, but they're also remarkably sparse. It's almost like someone carefully constructed a civilian identity for you." Maya felt her heart rate increase, but her father's training helped her maintain external calm. This was the moment she had been preparing for, when her carefully constructed cover story would either hold up under scrutiny or collapse completely. "I don't understand what you're suggesting," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "I've provided all the information requested on my application. Everything is documented according to standard procedures." Kane stood up and began pacing around the room, a technique designed to increase psychological pressure on the person being questioned. "Let's talk about your father, Chun. Dr. James Chun, military scientist who died in a car accident when you were 12. What did he work on?" "I was too young to understand his work," Maya replied. "He died when I was a child." "According to the records we've been able to access," Colonel Harris continued, "your father was involved in classified research related to human performance enhancement. After his death, all of his research materials were supposedly destroyed, but we've always suspected that some materials might have survived." Maya realized that this conversation was moving in a direction that could either expose everything she had worked toward, or provide her with the opportunity she needed to begin learning the truth about her father's death. "What kind of research?" she asked, allowing curiosity to creep in her voice. "Agent Williams," and Kane exchanged glances before Williams answered. "Your father was developing training protocols that could dramatically enhance human physical and mental capabilities. The project was classified at the highest levels, and his death effectively ended the research program." Maya made a decision that would change everything. What if I told you that my father's research didn't die with him? The room became completely silent. Kane stopped pacing. Colonel Harris sat forward in his chair, and Agent Williams's expression shifted from professional skepticism to intense interest. "What are you saying, Chun?" Kane asked, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Maya reached into her pocket and withdrew the small notebook she had brought with her to Fort Braxton. She placed it on the table where all three men could see it, but kept her hand positioned to grab it quickly if necessary. "My father left detailed records of his research," Maya said. "Training protocols, theoretical frameworks, experimental data. I've been following his programs for the past 10 years. Kane reached for the notebook, but Maya's hand moved faster than his eye could follow. One moment her hand was resting casually beside the notebook, and the next moment she had secured it against her body while remaining seated and appearing completely relaxed. "Not so fast, General," Maya said, her voice carrying a new tone of confidence. "First, I want to know exactly what happened to my father and why his research was so important that people were willing to kill for it." The reaction to her words told Maya everything she needed to know. Agent Williams went completely still in a way that suggested he was reaching for a concealed weapon. Colonel Harris's face showed recognition of something he hadn't expected to hear. Kane's expression shifted from suspicion to something that looked almost like fear. "What makes you think your father was killed?" Williams asked carefully. "Because the car accident that supposedly killed him happened on a straight road in perfect weather conditions, in a vehicle that had been maintained according to military standards," Maya replied. "Because witnesses reported seeing another vehicle leave the scene. Because his research disappeared so quickly after his death that it suggested someone knew exactly what they were looking for." Maya stood up slowly, her movement fluid and controlled. "But mostly because he taught me to recognize when people are lying, and everyone who ever told me about his death was lying." Kane made a decision that would prove to be a catastrophic error in judgment. Instead of attempting to de-escalate the situation or gather more information, he decided to use physical intimidation to regain control of the conversation. "Sit down, Chun," Kane commanded, moving toward her in a way that was meant to be threatening. "You're in serious trouble here, and cooperation is your only option for avoiding federal charges." Maya didn't sit down. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly and adjusted her stance in a way that looked casual but actually prepared her for defensive movement. "What federal charges would those be, General?" "Possession of classified materials, for starters," Kane continued, moving closer. "Lying on federal applications. Possible espionage charges, depending on how you obtained your father's research." Maya realized that Kane was planning to physically intimidate her into surrendering the notebook. His body language suggested he was preparing to use force if necessary, confident that his size and authority would allow him to overpower her easily. "You know what your problem is, General?" Maya asked, her voice remaining calm even as Kane moved to within arm's reach of her. "You see someone small and assume they're weak. You see someone quiet and assume they're helpless. You've built your entire career on those assumptions, and they've made you sloppy." Kane reached for Maya's arm, intending to forcibly seat her and establish physical dominance over the situation. What happened next took place so quickly that both Colonel Harris and Agent Williams would later have difficulty describing the sequence of events accurately. Maya's defensive response was automatic, the result of thousands of hours of training in situations exactly like this one. As Kane's hand moved toward her arm, she shifted her weight and redirected his momentum in a way that used his own force against him. Cain found himself off balance and vulnerable to the follow-up technique that Maya executed with precision that came from years of practice. The result was that General Marcus Cain, decorated veteran and commanding officer of the elite training program, found himself on the floor with Maya's knee positioned precisely over his sternum and her hand controlling his airway. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds, and Cain was suddenly unable to breathe properly due to the pressure on his chest. But Maya had miscalculated the force of her defensive response. In the chaos of the moment, as Cain fell backward, his body struck the concrete floor with an impact that created a distinctive cracking sound that everyone in the room recognized immediately. Cain's ribs had been broken by the fall, and his face showed the kind of pain that indicated serious injury. Maya realized instantly that the situation had escalated far beyond what she had intended, and that her cover identity was now completely blown. For 3 seconds, Maya remained in position over Cain, her training telling her to maintain control until she was certain the threat was neutralized. Cain's eyes showed not just pain, but genuine fear as he realized that the small woman he had been trying to intimidate possessed combat skills that far exceeded his own. "Please," Cain gasped, his voice barely audible due to the pressure on his chest and the pain from his broken ribs. "Please let me up. I can't breathe." Maya looked down at the man who had spent days trying to break her spirit and humiliate her capabilities. 3 seconds earlier, he had been the powerful authority figure who controlled her fate. Now he was lying helpless on the floor, reduced to begging for mercy from someone he had dismissed as useless. Maya released the pressure and stood up, immediately moving to ensure that Cain wasn't seriously injured despite the broken ribs. Her father's training had included extensive medical knowledge, and she quickly determined that Cain was not in immediate danger despite his obvious pain. "Colonel Harris," Maya said calmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was now clearly in control of the situation. "General Cain needs medical attention for broken ribs. Agent Williams, you might want to secure this room until we can all figure out exactly what happens next." As Maya helped Cain into a position where he could breathe more easily, she realized that everything she had worked toward for the past 10 years had just changed completely. Her cover was blown, her abilities were exposed, and she was now in federal custody with no clear path forward. But she had also learned something crucial in those 3 seconds when Cain was begging for mercy. The people investigating her father's death were afraid of something, afraid enough to threaten a civilian with federal charges rather than simply asking questions. Whatever had killed her father was still active, still dangerous, and still worth killing to protect. Maya looked around the room at the 3 men who now knew she was far more than she appeared to be. "Gentlemen," she said with a slight smile, "I think it's time we had a very different kind of conversation.